The Gort Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. You may know of Ellipsis Labs by their first product, Phoenix, a fully on-chain order book DEX that's done over $50 billion in unincentivized volume. This is one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. If you're interested in working for a mission-driven company, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers who are passionate about crypto and finance to work on Atlas. You can learn more and apply on Ellipsis Labs Twitter, @ellipsis_labs. Don't forget to check out Atlas too, @AtlasXYZ on Twitter. Hey guys, today we have on Uma Roy, known also as Uma the Puma on Twitter. She is one of the foremost people in the ZK space, also a personal friend. So hopefully we can talk about some stuff that so Uma goes on a lot of podcasts, so we're going to try to make this one exciting. But Uma, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me, Gort. I'm Uma. I'm the co-founder of Succinct. We're a company doing ZK stuff. We're building a ZKVM called SP1 and a prover network, which I think we're going to talk about here. Excited to hang out.
Okay, so what's the ZKVM first? What did you guys start working on, and then we can transition into the prover network, which is coming out soon. There is a white paper out now. If you want to bore yourself and read that, no, I'm just kidding. There is a white paper out now. What's the ZKVM to start with?
A ZKVM is short for ZK Virtual Machine, which means that basically you can write normal code, you compile it, and then we can prove the execution of totally normal code, and you get out a ZK proof. Why is this a breakthrough? I mean, historically, like people in crypto talked about ZK for ages and ages, right? I think like you can even look at the early Bitcoin talk forum in like 2013, and you can see like they were talking about ZK as like a way to scale the chain back then. But historically, to do ZK, you had to be like turbo autistic. Can I say that on the spot?
Yeah. That's encouraged.
Okay, good. You have to be a cryptographer. You have to be like know all this stuff. It took years to develop all this. Tons of resources. It was super complicated, and I think that's why it was really difficult. And you like didn't see that much adoption. For example, there's like all these teams, Scroll, ZK Sync, Polygon, who had to spend years and years of very smart people's times building ZK EVMs. And then a ZKVM makes it so that like the Succinct team is slaving away in our office. But as a result, now any developer can use ZK because you just like write Rust, you write your program in Rust, you compile it, you prove it with SP1, and it just works. So it's just kind of like this huge unlock for ZK broadly as a category to like really go mainstream.
Yeah. I actually talked to I think it'll come out probably slightly before this episode, but I talked to people have some context. I talked to the guy from Starkware, and they're building they wrote their own language, Cairo, and then they have can you differentiate maybe in layman's terms the difference between what they're doing versus what you're doing?
Yeah. I guess first of all, like the Starkware team's very, very legendary. They're super awesome. They like wrote all the original papers and stuff, Ellie. What they built was they also built a ZKVM actually, but to write programs for their ZKVM, you had to write their own language, Cairo. And Cairo is like very difficult to write. Like it's not a normal programming language. It's specific to ZK and optimized for ZK. And the problems with that are like, there's not like a long, deep list of Cairo libraries or anything like that. So it becomes like really hard to write programs for their Cairo VM. Whereas for us, we just prove the execution of Rust code. So, you can use like basically any Rust library and it works.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me if this is a good analogy. What you guys have done is sort of the equivalent for ZK proofs that Conduit is for launching rollups. Is this right? In the sense, is that a good analogy or not really? Because you can use any rollup can just send their data or whatever, and you guys create a proof of it, right?
It's like with our tech, it becomes a lot easier for any rollup to become ZK. And actually, we work pretty closely with Conduit to deploy some of their rollups as full ZK rollups. I mean, what's like the Kyle quote? Reasoning by analogy.
Yeah.
Actively leads to a long conclusion. I mean, in some ways it's similar. Like Conduit made launching a rollup way easier. So now there's
Yes.
like
That
thousands
was
of
the
rollups.
analogy. That was the whole analogy. There wasn't nothing more profound than that.
Okay, yeah, but that's like any piece of technology. Like, I don't know, like what.
All right.
Like,
Well, I was just trying to simplify this, but okay. So, what rollups what rollups will want to use your stack now? Like, and you guys generate proofs for them. What's the advantage of this for them?
oh, I think like every rollup's gonna want to use become a ZK rollup using SP1.
Okay, but they're not right now because of cost. Is that correct?
No. They are. This morning we announced that Mantle, which is a super big. Technically, they're an L2. Ethereum police don't come after me. They're using EigenDA. So they're like not a rollup. They're an L2 or on Validium. They announced that they're upgrading to become a ZK L2 using SP1. And they're a really big L2. They have like 2 billion TVL. So they're like a top 5 L2. Yeah, I think like we actually have a bunch of chains lined up to use SP1 and become a ZK rollup with it. I think the primary thing stopping people, or let's first talk about the benefits. I think the benefits are honestly pretty obvious. Like, you don't have to wait 7 days. You can like wait 1 hour to get your assets off the chain. Like, we're building this stuff to be better than TradFi. Like, we can't, like, the 7-day stuff is like not acceptable. It's actually secure. It's not a multi-sig. Like, if you look at most rollups today, they are like, what is going on? Like, it's just a multi-sig. There's no proof system. They're not even optimistic. Like, Base, I'm not sure has like a totally permissionless functional proof system. Or if they do, it's like it was recently added. Okay. And like that's a really big roll up. If you look at any of the other ones, none of them have that stuff. So it's like actually more secure. It gives you 1 hour instead of 7 days. And I think it's just the future of roll ups. So I think everyone's gonna use this stuff. I think the biggest blocker is just like, the tech wasn't ready until recently. Like, SP1 only became like production ready in August. We only recently launched our integration with OP Stack, which is we call it OP Succinct. So I think just these things will take some time because it is like pretty big upgrades to a chain. Like you're fundamentally like the security mechanism is super important. So it'll just take some time for people to adopt it. But I think you're already seeing like great signs of adoption with people like Mantle and a bunch of other chains like we're going to announce soon.
Okay, wait. Why does it still take an hour?
First of all, Ethereum's finality is like kind of garbage because like you have to do the whole 2 epoch thing.
Yeah, 18 minutes or something, or 12 minutes?
Yeah, 12 minutes. Second of all, proof generation isn't instant.
Okay.
So generally, generating proofs takes like tens of minutes. But the biggest reason is that when you post a proof to Ethereum, it still costs like a good amount of money. So if you are posting a proof like every 10 minutes, that can add up cost-wise. So that's why we just do every hour. But in the future, I think it could be as fast as like 10 minutes or even like one day, 5 minutes.
Yeah, actually, that kind of brought up another point, which I don't know how related it is, but I'm curious. You know how you can look and see that different rollups post proofs at different intervals? What is the reason for that? Like some rollups post proofs like very frequently, and then some post maybe like 3 times as infrequently. What is the deciding factor for that? Like how often you post proofs?
I think that's just up to the team and like how much money they want to spend on verifying proofs on Ethereum, what their users want, stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. So like but there should be a pretty substantial cost reduction if you post proofs less frequently, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, yeah, because I saw this I saw this like graph like of a bunch of different how frequently there was like dots on it of how frequently different rollups post, and I was just like I never really understood what the rationale was there for. Whereas like what is this one like Taiko they're posting like every like slot, right?
Yeah, they like I think they post for a lot of their blocks. I actually think they're trying to change that, by the way. Like they are trying to aggregate a bunch of proofs and post less frequently.
Because they're like hemorrhaging money.
Yeah, they literally are paying so much money to Ethereum for that. So I think they're trying to change that in their protocol.
Okay. Okay, so that makes sense. All right. All right. What is the prover network? So this is like your big, most recent launch. Show me on it.
Okay, so SP1 is our ZKVM. It's like a great piece of software. A lot of people use it. It makes ZK very easy. But yeah, SP1's awesome. Then our prover network is kind of like a protocol around SP1. So, you're a fan of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah. Been accused of that.
So yeah, with Bitcoin, let's look at what happened with like Bitcoin mining. So in the Bitcoin, you have a Bitcoin protocol that's just like this piece of open source software. And then you have this like global network of people who mine Bitcoin that are providing security to the chain. And what's really awesome about that global coordination is, the hash rate of the Bitcoin network exceeds like any one company, any one nation state, and is just like extremely large. And also because of like the Bitcoin block rewards, there was this global competition to accelerate the living shit out of the Bitcoin like SHA-256 like puzzle, right? And so you have these like really cracked people, mostly in China, manufacturing specialized ASICs for Bitcoin mining, right? And I think with SP1, we basically see like a really similar opportunity where like SP1 is this like core piece of open source, great technology. And right now we're the only ones who like generate proofs and send them back to people. So for some context, like if you want to use SP1 on your laptop, that's like not going to be a fun time. It just is very expensive. It requires a lot of resources. It's not that fast. The best place for generating SP1 proofs is on a GPU. And like most teams don't want to set up that stuff themselves. So usually what they do is they just send it to us and we generate the proof and send it back to them. But we were like, okay, we're in crypto and there's like an opportunity to basically take crypto economic incentives and create this global competition where anyone in the world can participate and accelerate SP1 and make it better. And instead of us just having an SP1 cluster, there's going to be this like global distributed proving cluster where everyone in the world is like motivated to accelerate SP1, make it better, cheaper, faster, and generate proofs. That's our prover network.
Is there benefit in a prover network being like widely distributed? So I understand the rationale of, okay, let's say that this becomes like a fierce competition. It's highly lucrative. Okay, maybe we get like special purpose built hardware. Maybe people will start allocating resources more efficiently as a function of wanting to generate proofs for this network. But does it need to be distributed in the same way that nodes and like maybe economic nodes, miners on a blockchain need to be distributed? Like, is there benefit in that capacity? That's what I don't really understand that well.
I think decentralization is generally good for us because like oftentimes we're proving rollup workloads and like that does require censorship resistance and liveness, which are kind of like benefits of decentralization. But I actually view like the decentralization and distributedness as primarily important because it increases competition and therefore leads to like better outcomes. So for me, the exciting part of the decentralized prover network is not necessarily that it's decentralized for like the sake of decentralization. Like I don't think that makes much sense. I think it's more just like by making a permissionless protocol where anyone can participate and like, they do great work, they accelerate SP1, and then they can profit off of that and like set up their own data center in a really cost efficient energy place. Then like that will make SP1 the products better. And like because it's distributed and anyone can participate in it, the competition will therefore lead to better outcomes.
Yeah,
so that's what's exciting about it.
That makes sense. I mean, intuitively, I think. So how much room is there still to scale? Like, well, actually, let me ask this a different way. Bitcoin miners, yeah, you could like mine on a laptop initially, right? And then, like GPUs and then eventually ASICs. And then now it seems like there's some, like we're converging closer probably on kind of plateauing in terms of like the efficiency of ASICs. There's a lot of like firmware systems you can use to hack, hack slightly higher efficiencies. Also, like cooled mining, I forget what they call it, but anyways, you can like put all these ASICs like, all the way in water, right? Like submerged mining, whatever it is. Anyways, these are like little hacks, but like the efficiency gains, I don't know are like so massive anymore. Like you're probably not going to see more than like maybe 5-10% difference between like highest quality hashers. Like the economies of scale, and I mean that's in theory like what something that Bitcoin kind of optimizes for. Like there shouldn't be like massive diseconomies of scale, right? Like so like I'm just curious, like how much is there to gain, you think, in terms of like computation and like efficiency with proving to like to push this forward? Is there like still a long way to go?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think actually we've had 2 teams take SP1 and accelerate it on an FPGA, which is very, very cool. There's this like Chinese team that they were like totally random people, and they just emailed me. They were like, we rewrote SP1 in like some language and we're trying to accelerate it. And, you know, like we're very, very excited about the prover network. We're looking forward to its participation. This is great for us. I'm like, this is genuinely random people. Like we have never talked to them. And then there's another team, we actually know them pretty well, that is also accelerated SP1 FPGA. And so I think there's still like, I think this is like just the start basically. And I think there's a lot of room to gain efficiencies from hardware. Today, like we wrote our own SP1 GPU prover, and that's a lot faster than our CPU prover. I think it's like a 10x improvement, if not more. But GPUs aren't even optimized for our computation at all. Like NVIDIA's busy optimizing for AI, which is kind of like the big daddy workload. So I think if you make a custom chip for all this stuff, you will get a lot better efficiency gains.
Yeah. So in terms of like making custom chips or just like making custom hardware in general, so one thing, here's something else. Like when I talked to the Starkware guy, one of his kind of points was like, there will be custom hardware certainly for this in the future. I mean, he's also ZK built, so we're like already on the path that we've gone far down the, you know, the world is ZK-fied in the future. So I'm putting that out there to like predicate this. But his intuition was that we're not there yet in terms of the actual, I don't know, like optimizing the code base in order to start really designing like custom hardware for specific ZK proving. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I broadly agree with him. Like, I think building hardware takes a very long time and is very expensive. And in ZK world, there's like kind of 2 places you can get benefits. You can get benefits from hardware, but you can also get benefits from just better cryptography and algorithms and software. And I think there's still like a lot of room to run on the cryptography stuff. And actually, like our cryptography team is doing a lot recently with like new techniques that they're excited about. So I think there is still like a 10x left on the cryptography side. And yes, the software iteration loop is like a lot faster than the hardware iteration loop. So I broadly agree with them. That's why our focus has been mostly on the cryptography side and implementing it on GPUs and commodity hardware. So you can imagine that like for the first year or 2 of the Succinct network, it's just like people running on GPUs across the world. But even then, like there's actually still a lot of advantages from operating GPUs in like non-data centers. Like AWS and stuff really mark up all their GPU prices. It's very expensive. If you go to bare metal, if you optimize your data center operations, that can actually be like a very meaningful cost efficiency gain. And that's not even stuff like our team is good at doing or like interested in doing. Like we just want to like keep on grinding the math and the algorithms. So it's actually awesome that there's like a mechanism to motivate others to like do this operational data center deployment work and like also benefit from it. And then I think after a year or 2, like, you know, there will be a solidification. It'll be like, oh yeah, this is kind of like the end game proof system. This is like what it's going to be for a while. And then you can like have people go out and build their chips.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so first of all, when does the like prover network, when are you guys expecting this to go live? Do you have a date yet or no?
I think in the next month, we probably want to do like a DevNet. We have an internal DevNet right now. And like we'll probably launch like a more public DevNet and then a testnet in the next 1 to 2 months. And then mainnet, like based on how those things go, hopefully like happens, you know, on the early end of next year.
Okay. All All right. So then can you like kind of not too in the weeds, but from like a sort of high level to like explain how this is structured and then also how it ties back into generating proofs for rollups or just the crypto aspect of it. But before that, I want to ask quickly, and this is tangentially related. Like you said that this Chinese team reached out and said that they're like rewrote this. Okay, do you expect there to be like a team that can greatly outperform just a rando plugging in their GPU at home? Like, is that very likely, like right off the rip, because they have like completely customized the like I don't know implementation or whatever?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think it's definitely possible. Yeah,
it's like quite professionalized, quite quickly, basically, in your mind.
It depends like by quickly. Like I do think doing like an FPGA or like even running a data center very professionally does take like a while. So I'm not sure, but yeah, I do think someone could do a lot better than like a rando for sure.
Yeah.
But
okay.
that's like also kind of the point. Like we want to motivate.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now the question that I cut myself off with another question by asking. So what is like? Can you kind of like explain the structure like, from plugging in, generating proofs, like how it will be designed, and yeah, like where the crypto economic aspect comes in, or just relate it back to crypto maybe.
Yeah. So the network actually is like a pretty simple architecture. You have people who are requesting proofs, and generally like they're in the form of like programs, like SP1 programs. And then you have people who are the provers who are actually generating the proofs. And then there's some sort of matching. So the network itself and the protocol runs an auction. It's called like the proof contest mechanism. That was kind of like the focal point of the paper, where, the requester sends in kind of like a price they're willing to pay. The provers participate in this auction for like the right to be able to fulfill the proof and get the transaction fee plus like a network reward. And then the auction has like some clearing mechanism to determine like who gets to generate the proof. And then the prover generates the proof, sends it back. And then once the proof gets verified, they get the money. And I think there's two interesting things about this construction. One thing that we worked really hard on the proof contest mechanism is you could do a really simple thing where just like the person who offers the cheapest price always gets to generate the proof. I mean, this is like good in some ways because like users are getting really cheap prices, but it also kind of has a lot of concentration effects where it's really likely that like one prover dominates the marketplace. And that can be not super good, at least for the initial like bootstrapping phase of the network, where we want a lot of people to participate. We want a lot of people to feel like, they're benefiting from the network and like being able to generate proofs and contribute value. So we don't want one professional prover to take over, at least initially. So our idea is kind of like in the initial phase, the proof contest mechanism makes it so that, basically based on how competitive your bid is, if you're a prover, you get allocated that proof with that probability. So it's like a probabilistic mechanism.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's like, I think one interesting thing about the network to like point out.
Okay. And so then who are the people requesting proofs? Like rollups, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's like the other side of the market. And like,
that's rollups. It could be like other applications as well.
Okay. But like, that's like your primary customer, like at least in practice will be rollups opting into this, right?
Yeah. Like rollups and generally like verifiable applications.
So what is like, I know you have a selling point and I think it's legitimate, like, 7-day versus 1 hour is like a credible selling point. What is like, if you have to sell rollups on opting into this, like what is your pitch? And also, is this already like in the works, I assume? Yes. Like to onboard rollups.
Oh, to the prover network?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, basically like it's anyone who uses SP1 uses the prover network.
Okay.
Like, because your other option is you run it by yourself, which is kind of a miserable experience. So like anyone using SP1 will use the prover network. I think that's not even a hard sale. They're just like, oh, I don't want to do all this stuff myself. So like, okay, great. Just like, use this endpoint and make a web request.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to ask, like, with optimistic rollups, do you think that there's any rollups that will just remain optimistic on the grounds that that 7-day window is actually more appealing to them from a business or regulatory? Or I mean, like, we've because like obviously Vitalik and many in the EF have long said that like the end game is ZK, the end game like ZK rollups, so on and so forth. And I'm just curious if you've either heard anecdotally or just your personal opinion as to whether some rollups will just want to remain optimistic in the long run.
I mean, I think there's going to always be like a lot of rollups. So like, I think for some rollups, like if you're like a gaming chain or something, like maybe the verifiability isn't your top priority. And like, maybe you don't even do the fault proof stuff. You just like run it as a multi-sig, and that's fine. So I think there will always be a spectrum. But I think like the biggest rollups on Ethereum, like all the top ones, are all going to be ZK.
Yeah, when you say there's going to be a ton of rollups, what makes you say that? Some people have different opinions. I'm curious, like, I know you're probably of the opinion, like, let 1,000 rollups flourish, but I also imagine that's probably good for your business, your line of business, if that is indeed the case. So like, what is your rationale on there being a ton of rollups versus maybe concentrating into a relatively small number?
Yeah, I think all the people who are like, oh, scale the L1 or whatever, I find it like a bit kind of misguided maybe. I mean, to be clear, I do think like Ethereum should be a lot more war mode, but I do think the rollup centric roadmap is super correct. Like if you look at the history of any system, you see like the way we get ultimate scalability is like by horizontally scaling and having more replicas. That is what a rollup is. So I think it just like makes a lot of sense. Like we're never going to fit everything on one computer. And like, I think I actually really disagree with the Solana vision there. And you can see like they're even starting to pivot to the rollup roadmap with their network extension stuff. They're just trying to be like kind of sneaky about it. But, you know, there was like the pudgy mint or whatever on Solana. And then they were like, oh, we're only doing like 60 TPS. And the MERT was like, oh, well, yeah, you have to like optimize your smart contract. It's just like, guys, like, okay, isn't it so like Ethereum is like super correct. And yeah, so I think every system will adopt this architecture because it is like terminally super correct. And then I think like if you continue down that line of reasoning, basically like something like Base or, you know, something like Arbitrum or whatever, like no matter what, the biggest applications on those rollups are going to like lead to hotspots. And then they're going to like want to have their own dedicated block space that they can customize for their application. Like you see this with Unichain and stuff like that. So I just think it like makes a lot of sense to like have rollups for everything, basically. Yeah.
Okay. So, but then you mentioned Unichain, although I guess it's not exactly an app chain, but I think it's more in the direction of an app chain versus it is functionally more similar to an app chain than a general purpose rollup, right? Like, especially with like the TE stuff they're doing. Like, but so my question then is, do you see the future of rollups being primarily closer to app chain ish or closer to a lot of the general purpose ones we have now that are, like Geth forks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like app chains do make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Like if you look at one of the most popular launches this year, look at Hyperliquid.
Yeah.
And, you know, they are an app chain.
Yeah, for sure.
And like, I think someone like, wait, by the way, with Hyperliquid, like that is not actually decentralized nor really a blockchain in its current form. You know, it's like the 4 nodes thing. Like I think someone will build a ZK version of Hyperliquid and be very, very successful. And like, if you're doing that, please talk to me, I guess, because we would love to like help you. But like, I think that's also secure, right? Like you're just like, oh, they can't like take your money and like, you know, it's not like 4 random validators running in some cloud. It's just like, oh, it's like secured by ZK.
Yeah, but can't you have it like, couldn't you just have like one validator secured by ZK? And that would be a pretty good outcome. Yeah. So like, why are we even messing around with those other 3? That's my question. But I don't understand why they're doing it.
Yeah, they should be Hyperliquid should have one validator and then be a ZK rollup. I fully agree. like that would be way more secure than what they're doing right now.
Yeah, but so then like what is the impediment to that? Like explain to me what like if they just wanted to become a single single sequence, single validator chain, it's not really like the same sequence.
We're not like a validator anymore.
Yeah.
Like your validator is like the ZK proofs. No, yeah, I absolutely think they should do that.
Yeah, that seems even like more cost effective than 4 validators if you can just whack off 3 of those. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, maybe. I think someone's gonna build ZK Hyperliquid. So I think the AppChain stuff makes a lot of sense. But then at the same time, like you even see with Hyperliquid, they're adding their EVM. Who knows like how much traction and adoption it'll have. But I think there's always this natural tendency of like, oh, once you build the app, you want to build a platform. So I think there was always going to be a spectrum.
Yeah. Ellipsis did the same thing. Unbelievable. Okay, you talked about the Solana for a second. I saw you guys major profile picture a Solana monkey. This is one way to ingratiate yourself with the Solana community. What are you doing on Solana now? Or what is this?
Oh yeah. This week we just launched our Solana verifier. We're basically like we launched a library where you can use it to verify SP1 proofs in Solana programs. I think like the big reason we did that recently is I think more of the Solana discourse has become more ZK friendly. Like the foundation tweeted, I think last week about like, oh, here's like all the ZK projects and how ZK can be useful to Solana. There's also a bunch of teams building network extensions that are kind of like, in their like starting to be a thing. So I think it's like super timely that the Solana ecosystem is kind of realizing the benefits of ZK. And I think SP1 is like the end game of ZK. So yeah, it's just like, okay, well, if you're using ZK on Solana, you should use SP1.
Okay, and so then who is like the target audience for your new welcoming of the Solana community? Like, who do you expect to start using SP1 in conjunction with Solana? Like you said, like maybe network extensions. Is that an example?
Oh yeah, like we already have one team that is building like a network extension like stack using SP1. So there's already like teams building with SP1 on Solana. There's another team that's like building a DEX or like a liquidity layer that connects to Solana with ZK proofs. There's another team that like ZKified the SVM to build like SVM rollups. So there's already a few teams building with SP1 on Solana.
Interesting. Yeah, it does seem like, well, at least from like Toli seems like a little bit, maybe anti rollup L2 architecture, but obviously it's not something he can really prevent. It'll be interesting to observe. Okay, I want to ask you about just like some other stuff with regards to Ethereum. I'll just pick your brain on some other thoughts. What do you think of base rollups?
I think they've become like kind of a popular narrative recently because I feel like it kind of solves some of the value accrual questions around like Ethereum and the rollup centric roadmap. I think as a product, they are a lot worse in their form they are today. So, yeah, I think that's just going to be like, I think tough for them to get adoption in the short term because it turns out like, oh, users like a centralized sequencer that can pre-conf. Oh, like, Ethereum's block time is 12 seconds and like, you're not going to have a centralized sequencer. So I think as a category, like, it's interesting and like emergent and actually does solve like the value accrual problems or discussion that Ethereum is facing. But like, I think the thing they'll have to like struggle with or figure out is like the UX.
Yeah, it does kind of seem like a pivot from at least the rollup centric roadmap in its original form. So, but earlier you said you had some reservations about the scale of the L1, I don't know, pitch as of late. Let's say that you do believe Ethereum should be in wartime mode, but the scale to L1 is maybe a bit misguided. Explain this.
Yeah, I think like the Ethereum community and leadership should be like in a mode where it's like, okay, here's the vision, here's the plan, here's like the North Star. I know it's like a trigger word for some people because it's like been used too much. I thought the John Charbonneau piece on all of this was great. I agree with like most of his takes. And I think there needs to be like really clear vision from the top. I'm like, okay, here's the roadmap. Here's how it accrues value to ETH. Here's the plan. Let's go. I think scaling the L1 as a part of that plan can be fine. But like, I think fundamentally, like Ethereum prioritizes verifiability and in a way that an ecosystem like Solana places less emphasis on. So like, we're never going to scale the L1 to the level of Solana, you know? That some of the scale to L1 people, like, so I think we should scale the L1 to a reasonable amount. It's like, okay, well, we last set the gas limit in like a few years ago. Computers have gotten a lot better since then. Okay, let's like make the obvious updates. That I am on board with. But I think fundamentally, like the vision from the Ethereum leadership does need to like account for the rollup centric roadmap because I think that is like correct. Like just scaling the L1 is not going to like solve our problems. And like also we're never going to scale the L1 to the level of Solana. Like that's just like given our community's values, that's not going to work. So I think there was like some people in Ethereum who may or may not have recently left that like, I think they just like they believed more in the Solana vision. And it's like, well, okay, if you believe in that vision, then like you should go work on Solana.
Thanks for listening to The Gort Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
So then when you say like it's not going to solve our problems, like what do you think the problems are right now with Ethereum? Like, do you think it's primarily like the bridging UX, the interop, yeah, well, actually, maybe I'll just ask a more poignant question or a more succinct question. What do you think of like interop? Like it is quite annoying. I was reminded of how annoying it was a couple of days ago. It is. I don't think like bridging and all this stuff amongst changes is very practical right now. Like that, and I'm not trying to be overly critical. Like I'm already overly critical, so I like kind of try to tame it back at this point. Like it's just not that interesting to be like so aggro. But I am curious, like it's not really like that to me is one problem I could point to be like, yo, this is extremely annoying. So like when you say problems, like what do you think? And then yeah, also interrupt.
I think the biggest problem is just like the vision setting by like the top. And I think like the fragmentation and interop is like the problem the users feel, but also like you have all these like different warring teams. And I think it's just like kind of like bad vibes. Like I think that's a big problem. And I think there needs to be like a central vision we're like unifying around against. And I think that has to come from like the top. So that for me is like the biggest problem. I think with interop, I mean, that's like a very like practical problem. And yeah, like it does suck today. I think interop will be solved by like wallet teams being competent and ZK. Like if you talk to Hart from across, he hates the 7-day thing. Like,
yeah,
arguably Cross is like kind of saving our ass right now. Like, it's pretty bad. But like, imagine a world without a Cross. Like, it would be like completely untenable. And Hart has like ranted to me before multiple times about this 7-day thing. It makes their life really difficult. They have to manage positions across a bunch of different chains with 7-day settlements. It's really hard to onboard new chains for this reason. Like, overall, the 7-day stuff makes their life really bad. And Hart has said, like, yeah, if 7 days was 1 hour, it'd be a lot easier for us. We could onboard new chains much more quickly, and a lot of my problems would be solved. So I think ZK will be like the back end that like enables much better interop. And then I think the wallet teams should just like natively integrate with the cross and not like, and like they just like need to, get their act together and like automatically swap and blah, blah, blah for you. So yeah, wallets and ZK, I think will save Ethereum.
Yeah, but I think the counterpoint to this is, well, I don't know, counterpoint. It's maybe a point I would make is like, if you do assume that 1,000 rollups will flourish, whether or not they're app chains or general purpose, whatever, but like they'll always be in competition right? Like in theory, like they're always going to want to own the end user. I think that's like pretty straightforward at this point. Maybe that's not a problem that you doing ZK stuff like have to deal with, but I don't know. Like the reason I say this is because when I said like, what are those problems? Like in many ways, yeah. And I guess John Sharp kind of insinuates this to some extent as well. But like a lot of people don't agree there's a problem, right? Like in some ways, if you were to read Vitalik's rollup centric roadmap 2 or 3 years ago, whenever that was, and then listen subsequently to the community rally around the rollup centric roadmap, you would say like, okay, this is playing out exactly as expected. Like there's all this competition amongst these teams, and now people are like, so I mean, I tend to agree with you. Like the vibes don't seem like great, right? And it does seem increasingly so. Like you saw this Aave and Polygon thing, right? Aave, Morpho, Polygon thing. Like these are little things, but they come up like with relative frequency at this point, I would say, where there's like, oh, like we want to own more of this part of the stack, right? And so I don't know, like if you have just all these different teams competing, like competition drives, like, but at the same time, like, yeah, the vibes aren't going to be good. Like, I don't know, like, is Ag Layer going to solve this? Do you know what I mean? Like that's the only, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think also like crypto in general, like a lot of the discourse and competition happens over like Twitter, which like particularly promotes a certain level of toxicity. I also think this is exacerbated by the fact that narrative is so important versus like real value, just because like given the phase we are as an industry, like, you know, I think in any industry there is like competition, and as a result, like kind of bad vibes. Like even in AI, like you have OpenAI, you have Google, you have like Anthropic, and then you have like things like, oh, before the big Google event, a day before OpenAI will do their event, and it's like, oh, funny coincidence. So like, you know, I think there is like examples of this kind of behavior, like not just to our space. But like our space is particularly toxic because like a lot of it's on Twitter. We're terminally online. You have to be like pretty odd to be into crypto right now. Like, you know, I do think there's like certain reasons why it's like a little worse, but I don't think it's like wildly unusual.
Yeah, that's fair. Justin Drake, I interviewed him, talked about it. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting, I guess. The whole Beamchain proposal. It's not like, you know, it's not going to get people like so pumped up, but I will say that he says it's like primarily targeted toward developers. Anyways, he's got this whole Beamchain proposal. I assume you've read it, but also our friend Doug like wrote about his Beamchain, if you will, which got a lot of people pumped up. Yeah, like what do you think of the Beamchain? And then also, what did you think of Doug's future Ethereum? Also, Doug's like big ZK. I never really understand why, but he's a big ZK guy as well. He's like convinced ZK is going to solve everything. So, yeah, I don't know. What did you think of Beamchain and then some of the other proposals maybe?
Well, yeah, that's because Doug's a smart guy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like Justin, basically his idea with the Beamchain is like the next generation of Ethereum's consensus layer. We get like a lot of the features we want, like faster finality. We ZKify everything with the ZKVM. I think, I mean, obviously, I think the 5-year timeline is kind of tough, but yeah, I think like a lot of that stuff like makes a lot of sense, and I think is really needed. Like, I think we do really need faster finality, like as close to single slot finality as possible. So yeah, I think that's like an interesting proposal. I think Doug's proposal was like more like clean in some ways. So that was why people were excited by it. I think if you think of like an enshrined ZKVM, that's very exciting because basically like that lets you scale the L1 quite a lot. Now I do think that because like, you know, basically all the people who are testing, they just verify ZK proof, and now you can have, you know, your toaster in the Sahara Desert, like, you know, attesting to the chain. So I think that's very exciting for those reasons. I do think like that does require things like real-time proving, where basically you can prove stuff in near real time so that like when the block is proposed, you also have like a proof of the execution alongside it. I think we're getting close to that for sure. Like I think today we can do that in like maybe optimistically like dozens of seconds. But I think like there will need to be another step function change for real-time proving. And I don't know, hopefully like some of the smart people on the Succinct network like figure that out.
Is real-time, okay, so if you had to guess, is something like real-time proving, is that going to come about as a function of improvements to like the cryptography side, or would that come about as a result of hardware, or both?
Both.
Okay. But like if you had to like lean one way or another, is it that we can write better code, or is we can just like make really like super fast machines?
No, I think it'll be both. Like I think there's a 10x in both, and then when you 10 times 10, you get 100, which is what you need.
Yeah, math checks out.
You have to pull out all the tricks.
Okay, there are a lot of ZKVMs. What differentiates them? Like every day I see a new ZKVM launched, and I don't even know. I honestly, this isn't an insult towards you, but I like don't know what any of them are being used for. So like, I don't even know what one's being used for. So like, imagine me spectating from a distance and seeing like, you know, one or two come out a day. I'm like, yo, like, what are these? What's going on here? So why does everybody need a ZKVM?
ZKVM is kind of like the holy grail of ZK and like maybe even cryptography broadly. Like I feel like it's kind of like the AGI of ZK in some ways. Like it's super end game. I think it means you can like prove anything, and it's like it's very correct. Like I think actually the fact that there's so many people who are working on it who are very smart means that like clear the technology is like terminally correct and has like a lot of potential. I mean obviously like I'm one of them, so I would think that. In terms of like different, so I just think it's just like a very like exciting problem to work on because it's like the AGI of cryptography basically. So it like makes sense to me. A lot of people working on it. I think in terms of like, well, also, okay, wait. I think there are a lot of people using our ZKVM. I do want to clarify that. There's like a lot of rollups. We've proven like trillions of cycles. We run like 2 DA bridges from Celestia and Avail. We do ZK co-processing stuff for Lido. Polygon's using it to build Agler. So like, to be clear, there are a lot of people using our ZKVM. And I think that's like basically it's on this like exponential trajectory, I would say. So yeah, like I just think it's the future of ZK. So of course, people are excited. In terms of differentiation, I think the biggest ones right now are just like how fast it is and how cheap it is. Because those are the 2 biggest bottlenecks to like proving. And yeah, right now, like that's what everyone's competing on. That's why there's like so many benchmarks and stuff like that. But I think over time, like as the space matures, like hopefully like different teams will go down like different feature sets. Like I think you even saw this in the rollup roadmap. Like initially OP Stack and Arbitrum were like super competitive and like offering basically the same product, which was like an EVM framework. But now, like, Arbitrum's decided to do Stylus, which is like, oh, you can write any smart contracts in any language that compiles to WASM. And OP is like really focused on superchain and interop. So like, I think their visions of the future have like pretty dramatically diverged. Obviously, they're still very competitive, but like you can just tell the teams have like a very different philosophical flavor about like what they think is interesting, what's important. And I think like the ZKVM space is like pretty early. So like I think that kind of divergence will happen in the future where like my hope is it'll be less PvP and it'll be more like, oh, the ZKVM is like good for these use cases and stuff like that and has these particular special features and like others have like a very different position.
So you guys have this prover network. What is the business model of like ZK proving? Like, do you guys, right now, you guys generate proofs for rollups? Okay. You get paid to do so. In the future, like, what is the business model of a company like Succinct? Actually, let me give some context. It sounds like a bit of a loaded question. A lot of these ZK teams raise godforsaken amounts of money. You guys have raised a ton of money, okay? I'm curious.
Not as much as others, but yeah.
Well, no, I mean, it's not a bad thing by any means. I'm just pointing out, like, these raises are massive. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, dude, I don't even, granted, it doesn't mean anything. I don't know what it means. But I'm sitting here, I'm like, I don't like, what? Right? But like I think from like my perspective, it's because, okay, this is such a fundamentally bleeding edge technology. Like whoever wins is going to win the world. It's going to win Amazon. But like, I don't really, like connecting those dots is a little bit difficult from somebody on the sidelines. Like, I don't know why this is like so wildly lucrative in the future. You know what I mean? But so I'm curious, like if you were pitching, like pretend I'm a VC for a second, like what's the business model? Just, and it doesn't have to just be Succinct, just in general, maybe. I'm curious.
Well, I think like the ZK system that ends up like proving all transactions in crypto and maybe like all software is going to be incredibly valuable. Like, I think Max said this on a recent podcast. It was like 0.2 cents per transaction at 1 million TPS is 60 billion ARR. And okay, obviously that's a total meme, but I think there's like some truth to that. It's like, imagine Ethereum does 10,000, 100,000 TPS. Every one of those transactions is going to be ZK proven. Imagine we're taking like, 0.1%. That's like a really great outcome,
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. And like, if we're the fundamental security layer for like how all the blockchains are connected and every transaction and every block and every chain is ZK proven with our technology, like that's huge. Like that's like very obviously huge.
If you guys capture that value. So yes, it is. But like, this is a lot of my like, that I won't go down to like my whole reservations about maybe Web3 or like what I think is like the genuine long-term like distribution of value capture. I'm like very skeptical of personally. Like maybe you can like read into a lot of my tweets and see that like that maybe is where I have differences with a lot of people. It's just like all of this can be true, right? And like still like there may not be such an obscene amount of value to capture. But okay, I think you gave a good enough answer that I won't pry. And it's one of those things where I don't have enough context to understand like what the actual, I mean, if every transaction in the world is ZK proven and it's using Succinct, okay, sure. Yeah, like that makes sense that you guys would make money. That, I mean, intuitively, that does make sense.
That's happen for sure. We also, okay, I think a relevant comp that's like less like, if you look at the amount of money that's paid to validators today in emissions, like how much do you think that is? It's probably like hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year.
Yeah, it's over $1 billion. Yeah. I think like, yeah. So,
I mean, that's a ton of money that's getting paid out. And ZK. Yeah,
but Ethereum. Okay, hang on. I understand the point you're making. Ethereum as a business is losing money. Like when it is inflating, it's losing money. Like to be clear. Now, that's why a lot of times we decide, okay, we're not going to model these like businesses. But like when there is more net emission than there is net burn, like that is money that is being lost. And if you could say, okay, well then like actual, like what do they call it? REV, which I think is like, I always forget these acronyms, like real economic value, but I think this is just like tips. Like MEV plus tips. That is like very, very negligible for what it's worth as a function of like its market cap. So like I am like very skeptical of getting into like proper dollar denominated valuations, especially with something like Ethereum. Like I don't think it's a good idea at all. Like that's why I've long said like you got to meme the money thing. You have like I don't think it's gonna work. I don't, but like you do need to meme the money thing because also like if you think about it, like MEV over time should trend closer to zero, right? Like so that's also why I don't necessarily agree with Samani, right? Like I think he's directionally correct, but I also think like, okay, dude, this also goes down. Like, so, but yeah, okay. Well, it's reasonable.
Even outside of Ethereum, if you look at like all the Cosmos chains and like all the other random chains, the amount of money they pay to their validators and issuance is probably quite significant. And like, it is just simply more economical if they were secured by ZK. Like, okay. Yeah. So right, I think, that's like already like, I think pretty good evidence to point out that in the market for crypto, like security and blockchains, like ZK is a really great solution.
Okay. I honestly don't have like, I don't know enough to dispute that. So I'll say like, okay, that sounds good to me. All right. the final thing I wanted to ask you is about, like, I know you follow Bitcoin stuff a little bit. What do you think of, I mean, there are some teams that are, well, like with BitVM 2, it's very complex, but there's been some like research on this as of late. There's teams launching papers. Like I know a couple teams, Alpin and Tetraya are going the ZK route. I don't really know what that means functionally, but yeah, what do you think about like Bitcoin? Have you like dug in it any to that?
Yeah, so Alpin uses SP1 to be building their Bitcoin rollup Bitcoin, but I don't know exactly what the right terminology here is. I know the Bitcoin people are like somehow even more sensitive than the Ethereum people.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of like an optimistic rollup.
Yeah. But yeah, they use SP1 in building their rollup. I'll just call it that. I think like to me, the Bitcoin space is like particularly exciting because it's new. And it seems like finally there's like some life and people interested in building stuff with Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin needs ZK like way, way, way more than Ethereum, obviously. Like, it's so limited in like functionality. Like they are never going to scale the base layer at all. So the only hope they have is scaling is ZK. And for me, like, in terms of Succinct, I think it's like an exciting new vertical where like, okay, it seems like there is interest in scaling Bitcoin. Who knows whether it'll work out or not? It does seem like a reasonably interesting thing to try. Like, it does seem like there's a clear thesis there. Like, this is digital gold. We want to make it programmable. ZK is the only solution for that. And like, yeah, like, we would love to like work with those people and help that. So yeah, that's like kind of how I do it. Like interesting new opportunity.
The thing is, one thing I don't understand so well is like the biggest push. Well, I guess the most versatile push is OPCat, but it's still not like so clear to me if we like, let's say in your kind of, I don't know, utopian vision, we were able to get OPCat. Like, I don't think, like, for example, OPCat's much more on the table than some like obscure opcode that's like, I don't know, OPZK verify or something like that, right? Like that maybe way, way down the line. I don't know, maybe. But OPCat apparently can help like emulate covenants. Like it's not a covenant, but it can help. I mean, you can do all sorts of little contraptions with this. But what I don't understand is like, if in an idealized world, you got OPCat, like, does this actually enable a practical ZK rollup, would you say? Or still like kind of cumbersome?
My impression is that it would be still not as like smooth sailing as Ethereum.
Yeah.
But I think it would be significantly better than the current situation, is like my very uninformed understanding.
Yeah, that's what like the guy from Starkware seems to think. And obviously, a lot of the other teams are quite, keen on OPCat. So I guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I did. It's crazy to me. Like OPCat is like actually a really small opcode just to like concatenate strings, and the Bitcoin community is like up in arms about it. Yeah, so there's definitely like a range of like Ethereum. It kind of was like a reminder to me that like the Ethereum people, even though they're slow moving, there's ecosystems that are a lot more, ossified.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Uma, thank you so much. I think we got through a lot. I feel like I'm pretty close to being an expert on ZK now. Yeah, I think we nailed everything. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.